Ho Karen. Threatens single mom protecting assault victim. She was FBI special agent, she thought. She was bullying a helpless mother. But in seconds, the neighborhood learned she had just picked a fight with a trained agent who doesn't back down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn evening air carried a crisp chill as Rachel Green hurried toward the community clubhouse with her 10-year-old daughter, Emily. Streetlights flickered on along the winding suburban roads, casting long shadows across neatly trimmed lawns. "Mom, do we really have to go to another boring meeting?" Emily asked, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she tried to keep up with her mother's brisk pace. Rachel smiled down at her daughter. "I know these meetings aren't fun, sweetie, but it's important to be involved in our community." She adjusted her blazer, smoothing out the wrinkles from their rushed dinner. "Besides, you brought your homework to work on, right?" Emily nodded, patting her backpack. "Yeah, but Mrs. Peterson gave us so much math tonight." They approached the red brick clubhouse, its windows glowing warmly against the darkening sky. Several cars were already parked outside, and Rachel recognized Karen Whitfield's silver Mercedes in its usual spot, right next to the "Reserved for HOA President" sign she'd had installed last month. Inside, the meeting room buzzed with quiet conversation. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a long table where Karen sat, perfectly coiffed in her designer outfit, shuffling through papers with an air of self-importance. Rachel guided Emily to a corner table where she could do her homework, then found a seat near the middle of the room. As people settled in, Rachel noticed a teenage boy she didn't recognize standing near the back wall. He wore a navy blue hoodie and kept his eyes down, clearly trying to be invisible. Something about his demeanor, the way he held himself so carefully still, triggered her old FBI instincts. Karen's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "Before we begin discussing the agenda items, I need to address an ongoing security concern." Her sharp gaze fixed on the teenager. "Young man, this is a private meeting for homeowners and residents only." The boy shifted uncomfortably. "My grandmother sent me. She couldn't make it because of her hip surgery, but she wanted me to take notes about the new landscaping rules." "Loitering is strictly prohibited," Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood, and we simply can't have unauthorized persons hanging around." Rachel's jaw tightened as she watched the boy's shoulders hunch further. Several residents turned to stare at him, and whispers rippled through the room. "If your grandmother is Miss Williams from Oak Street," Karen continued, "she should know better than to send a substitute." The pause before the last word spoke volumes. "I have her note," the boy said quietly, reaching for his pocket. "That's enough." A man in the front row stood up suddenly. Rachel recognized him as Bill Thompson, who always complained about property values at these meetings. "We don't need your kind causing trouble here." The teenager backed up a step. "I'm not, I just—" Thompson advanced toward him, face reddening. "Maybe you need some help finding the exit." Rachel was on her feet before she could think, years of training kicking in. She moved swiftly between Thompson and the boy, her stance casual but prepared. "There's no need for threats, Mr. Thompson. This young man is here representing his grandmother, a legitimate resident." "Stay out of this, Mrs. Green," Karen snapped from the front. "This is a security matter." Rachel didn't budge. "The only security threat I see is an adult man threatening a minor." Her voice was calm, but carried the authority of her former profession. "That's not something we want to explain to the police, is it?" Emily had looked up from her homework, her eyes wide with concern. Several other residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "How dare you?" Karen stood, her manicured hands flat on the table. "This is precisely the kind of disruptive behavior we've come to expect from you, Mrs. Green. Need I remind you that your family is still in a probationary period of residency?" Rachel felt the boy trembling slightly behind her. Without turning around, she said gently, "What's your name?" "Jamal," he whispered. "Jamal, you have every right to be here representing your grandmother." She raised her voice to address the room. "And I think we all know this isn't about security or meeting protocols." Karen's face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Green, if you continue this disruptive behavior, you'll leave me no choice but to begin eviction proceedings." We have strict rules about maintaining the peaceful character of our community. Mom? Emily's worried voice carried across the suddenly silent room. Rachel's heart clenched at her daughter's fear, but she held her ground. Threatening eviction for protecting a minor from harassment? That's an interesting interpretation of peaceful character, Mrs. Whitfield. You're new here, Karen said, her voice honeyed with warning. You don't understand how things work in our community. But you'll learn, one way or another. She smiled tightly. Now, shall we return to the proper agenda, or should I note down another violation? The tension in the room was suffocating. Rachel felt Jamal's presence behind her, heard Emily's pencil drop with a clatter in the silence, and saw the mixture of discomfort and cowardice on her neighbors' faces. For a moment, she wavered. They'd worked so hard to make a home here after losing John. But then she remembered her husband's voice. Stand for what's right, even when you stand alone. Note whatever you want, Rachel said quietly. But Jamal stays. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Karen called for an immediate adjournment, her voice shrill with barely controlled rage. As people hurried to leave, some avoiding Rachel's eyes while others gave her small nods of approval, she turned to check on Jamal. "Thank you," he mumbled, still looking at the floor. "My grandma. She really did send me. She wanted to know about the new rules because she can't tend her flowers like she used to." "You don't need to explain," Rachel assured him. "Would you like us to walk you home?" He shook his head quickly. "No, I'll be okay, but thanks again." He slipped out the door, his hoodie pulled close around him. Emily appeared at Rachel's side, her backpack clutched tight against her chest. "Mom, are we really going to have to leave our house?" Rachel took her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "No, sweetie, we did the right thing, and nobody can take our home away for that." She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. They walked home through the gathering darkness, their footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. The streetlights cast alternating pools of light and shadow, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this evening had changed something fundamental in their lives. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Emily said suddenly, her small hand warm in Rachel's. "You were like a superhero back there." Rachel smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. Sometimes being brave just means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. They walked the rest of the way in silence, both lost in thought about what had happened at the meeting. The porch light they'd left on welcomed them home, a beacon in the darkness, and Rachel tried to focus on that light rather than the shadows gathering at the edges of her mind. The morning sun painted the neighborhood in soft golden light as Rachel Green tended to her small garden. The purple petunias and yellow marigolds added cheerful splashes of color against the pristine white fence. She adjusted the spray of the watering can, making sure each plant got just enough water to thrive. "Bus is coming, Mom," Emily called from the front door, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Rachel set down her watering can. "Got everything? Homework? Lunch?" "Double-checked," Emily grinned, revealing the gap where she'd lost a tooth last week. Rachel wrapped her daughter in a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo. "Have a wonderful day, sweetie. I love you." "Love you too, Mom." As Emily bounced down the driveway toward the bus stop, the purr of an expensive engine caught Rachel's attention. A silver Mercedes crept along the street, moving far slower than necessary. The tinted window rolled down smoothly, revealing Karen Whitfield's perfectly coiffed blonde hair and false smile. "Good morning, Rachel," Karen called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You know, I've been thinking about last night. Our community has certain standards. We don't appreciate troublemakers who stir things up. It would be such a shame if your daughter had to adjust to yet another new home." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow, but years of FBI training kept her expression neutral. She maintained steady eye contact with Karen, saying nothing as the Mercedes glided away. The mention of moving stirred memories Rachel usually kept carefully locked away. She picked up the watering can again, but her hands trembled slightly as the past washed over her. 5 years ago, she'd been Special Agent Rachel Green, known for her steady nerves and sharp instincts. The Baltimore field office had been her second home, a place where she'd excelled at protecting others and pursuing justice. Then came that awful night, when her husband David, a fellow agent, didn't come home from an undercover operation. The knock on the door at 3 a.m., the devastating news. Emily, only 5 then, crying for her daddy. Rachel's grip tightened on the watering can. She'd made her choice in those dark days that followed. Emily needed her mother more than the FBI needed another agent. They'd moved here, seeking a fresh start, a safe place to heal. Now Karen threatened to upend that peace. The morning passed in a blur of household tasks and freelance work. Around mid-afternoon, while checking the mail, Rachel spotted a familiar figure shuffling down the sidewalk. Jamal Williams walked with his shoulders hunched, as if trying to make himself invisible. The teenager's face still showed traces of anxiety from the previous night's confrontation. "Jamal," Rachel called out softly, not wanting to startle him. "Would you like some lemonade?" "I just made a fresh pitcher." He hesitated, glancing around nervously before nodding. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." In the kitchen, Rachel poured 2 tall glasses while Jamal perched uncertainly on a bar stool. His long fingers fidgeted with the condensation on the glass. "I'm sorry about what happened at the meeting," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was just cutting through to get home from tutoring." "You have nothing to apologize for," Rachel said firmly. "You have every right to walk through this neighborhood. My grandmother says I should take the long way around, avoid certain streets." He stared down at his lemonade. "She worries." Rachel's heart ached at the resignation in his voice. "Listen to me, Jamal. What happened last night was wrong. You're not alone in this. I promise." He looked up, surprise and cautious hope flickering across his face. "Why are you being so nice to me? Most people here just pretend they don't see me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Rachel said simply. "And because I taught my daughter that standing up for others isn't optional, it's necessary." They talked a while longer, and Rachel saw some of the tension ease from Jamal's shoulders. When he left, his steps seemed lighter, his head held higher. The rest of the day passed quietly until early evening, when Rachel returned from picking up Emily from her piano lesson. A stark white notice had been taped to their front door, the HOA letterhead prominent at the top. Rachel's jaw tightened as she read the official-looking document. "Notice of violation. Unapproved property modifications detected. Immediate correction required to avoid fines of $100 per day. Compliance inspection scheduled." Emily peered around her mother to read the notice. "But Mom, we haven't changed anything. Our house looks exactly the same as always." Rachel carefully removed the tape, folding the notice precisely. She'd documented enough evidence in her FBI days to recognize intimidation tactics when she saw them. "You're right, sweetie. We haven't changed a thing. Is this because of last night? Because you helped Jamal?" Rachel looked down at her daughter's worried face, seeing the same blend of sensitivity and strength that David had possessed. "Yes, sweetheart. But don't worry. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but that doesn't make it any less right." Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching dust motes in its golden rays. Rachel stood at the counter, staring into her coffee mug as if it might hold answers to the troubles weighing on her mind. The events from yesterday's HOA meeting kept replaying in her thoughts. Emily sat at the kitchen table, pushing her scrambled eggs around her plate. She watched her mother with worried eyes that seemed too knowing for her 10 years. "Mom?" she asked softly. "Are we going to have to move again?" Rachel's heart clenched at the question. She set down her coffee and moved to sit beside her daughter, reaching out to smooth Emily's sandy brown hair. "No, sweetheart. This is our home now." "But that mean lady, Mrs. Whitfield." Emily's voice trailed off. "Listen to me," Rachel said, taking Emily's small hands in hers. "Sometimes people act unkindly because they're scared or angry about things that have nothing to do with us, but running away won't solve anything." Emily's blue eyes, so like her father's, searched Rachel's face. "Is that why you helped that boy? Because it was the right thing to do?" "Exactly." Rachel squeezed her daughter's hands. "Your dad always said that doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing." Emily's face brightened at the mention of her father. "I remember him saying that." After getting Emily off to school, Rachel sat at her desk, phone in hand. The business card she'd kept all these years was worn at the edges. Special Agent Marcus Thompson, her old partner from the bureau. She dialed the number, then hesitated with her finger over the call button. Images flashed through her mind: squad cars with flashing lights, reporters hungry for a story, neighbors watching from behind curtained windows. No, involving the FBI now would only escalate things. This needed a quieter approach. Rachel grabbed her laptop instead, pulling up property records and HOA documentation. Her investigative instincts, dormant but not forgotten, kicked in as she began piecing together information about Karen Whitfield's iron grip on the community. By early afternoon, Rachel drove to the modest duplex where she'd learned Jamal lived with his grandmother. The garden, though small, burst with carefully tended roses and cheerful zinnias. She barely had time to knock before the door opened, revealing a petite woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Mrs. Williams?" Rachel asked. "I'm Rachel Green. I was at the HOA meeting yesterday." Recognition dawned on the older woman's face. "Please, call me Gloria. Come in, come in. I've been wanting to thank you for what you did for my Jamal." The living room was neat but comfortable, family photos covering the walls. Gloria gestured for Rachel to sit on a well-loved floral sofa. "I just wanted to check on Jamal," Rachel said. "Make sure he's okay." Gloria's eyes grew misty. "That boy's been through so much. Lost his mama 5 years ago, and his daddy's not in the picture." "I do my best, but—" She straightened her shoulders. "It ain't easy being the only black family in this section of the neighborhood. Some folks, they make sure we know we're not welcome." "Like Karen Whitfield?" Gloria nodded slowly. "That woman's been trying to force us out since we moved in. First it was complaints about my roses being too tall, then it was the color we painted the shutters, even though we got approval. Always something." Rachel leaned forward. "Has she ever threatened you directly?" "Not in words, exactly. But the message is clear enough." Gloria's hands twisted in her lap. "Jamal told me what you did, standing up to them like that. Not many would have done the same." "It's what anyone should have done," Rachel said firmly. They talked for another hour, Gloria sharing stories about Jamal's achievements in school despite the challenges he faced. The boy was taking advanced placement classes, dreaming of becoming an engineer. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Rachel helped Emily get ready for bed. They had just finished their nightly routine of reading together when Emily pointed out her window. "Mom, why is Mrs. Whitfield's car out there?" Rachel moved to the window. Sure enough, Karen's black SUV idled across the street, its headlights blazing through the darkness directly at their house. Emily pressed closer to her mother's side. "It's okay, sweetie," Rachel said, keeping her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "She's just trying to scare us, but we're not going to let her, are we?" Emily shook her head, though she gripped Rachel's hand tightly. "No, we're staying right here." The SUV's headlights continued to glare through their window, casting long shadows across Emily's bedroom floor. The aroma of vanilla and melting chocolate chips filled Rachel's kitchen as she and Emily worked side by side at the counter. Flour dusted their aprons, and spots of cookie dough decorated Emily's cheeks. The 10-year-old's tongue poked out in concentration as she carefully measured brown sugar into a mixing bowl. "Do you think Jamal likes chocolate chip cookies, Mom?" Emily asked, looking up with bright eyes. Rachel smiled, running a hand over her daughter's hair. "I think most teenagers do, sweetie, and if he doesn't, I'm sure his grandmother will appreciate them." Emily nodded seriously. "Mrs. Williams seems nice. Like Grandma Green, but with better hugs." The observation made Rachel laugh. Her mother-in-law's hugs had always been a bit stiff. "That's very diplomatic of you." They worked together in comfortable silence, the mixer whirring as they prepared another batch. Rachel felt her shoulders relax for the first time in days. Here in their sunny kitchen, with the sweet scent of baking cookies surrounding them, Karen's threats seemed distant. The doorbell chimed just as they were sliding the last tray into the oven. Rachel wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. Sarah Martinez from 3 doors down stood on the porch, holding a ceramic dish. "I saw you both baking through the window," Sarah said with a warm smile. "Thought you might like some of my lemonade to go with those cookies." Rachel's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. That's so thoughtful. Please, come in. More neighbors arrived as the afternoon wore on. Tom and Linda Chen brought their 7-year-old twins, who immediately started playing board games with Emily. Robert Johnson, the retired teacher from across the street, shared stories about teaching Jamal in middle school. "That boy's got a bright future," Robert said, accepting a warm cookie. "He just needs people in his corner." The kitchen filled with conversation and laughter. Rachel watched Emily, showing the twins how to properly dunk cookies in milk, her heart swelling. This was what community should be: people coming together, supporting each other. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly widow from next door, touched Rachel's arm. "Dear, I want you to know what you did at that meeting, standing up for that young man. It meant something to a lot of us. We've been too quiet for too long." Rachel squeezed the older woman's hand, grateful for the support. Maybe things were turning around. Maybe Karen's influence wasn't as strong as she'd thought. The sharp rap at the door cut through the warm atmosphere like a knife. Rachel opened it to find Karen Whitfield on her doorstep, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the humid afternoon. Her eyes swept past Rachel to take in the gathering inside, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Well, well," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Quite the little party you're having here. I don't recall seeing a request for approval for a social gathering of this size." Rachel kept her voice level. "We're just having cookies with a few neighbors, Karen. There's nothing in the HOA bylaws against that." "Actually," Karen pulled a folder from her designer handbag. Section 12, Paragraph 3, clearly states that gatherings of more than 5 non-resident guests require prior board approval. For noise control purposes, you understand. Behind Rachel, the happy chatter had died down. She could feel the tension radiating from her neighbors. Karen raised her voice slightly. "I'd hate to have to issue citations to everyone involved. Some people might not be able to afford the fines." Her gaze fixed pointedly on the Chens, who were gathering their children. "We should go," Linda Chen whispered, ushering her twins toward the door. "Thanks for the cookies, Rachel." One by one, the neighbors made their excuses and left, avoiding Karen's satisfied smirk. Only Mrs. Peterson remained, her arthritis making her slower to rise. Karen stepped closer, dropping her voice. "Let me make something very clear, Rachel. Anyone who sides with you will regret it. I can make life very, very miserable for people in this community. You might want to remember that before you try playing hero again." Emily appeared at Rachel's side, her small hand slipping into her mother's. "Why are you so mean?" she asked Karen, her voice trembling but clear. Karen's eyes narrowed. "You should teach your daughter better manners, though I suppose without a father's influence." Rachel's grip tightened on Emily's hand. "That's enough. Please leave my property." "Gladly." Karen turned on her heel. "Expect citation notices in the morning, for everyone who was here today." After Karen left, Rachel helped Mrs. Peterson home, then spent the evening trying to salvage the cheerful mood with Emily. They packed cookies into containers for Jamal and his grandmother, but the earlier joy had evaporated. Later that night, after tucking Emily into bed, Rachel went to check the mailbox, hoping to remove any nasty surprises before morning. The metallic screech of the hinges seemed louder in the dark. Inside, she found a stack of HOA bylaws, the pages smeared with what looked like red paint. Some of it came off on her fingers, sticky and fresh. Rachel stared at the vandalized documents, her former FBI training noting details automatically. The paint was still wet, the pages were crumpled with force, the mailbox door had fresh scratches around the lock. But it was the message these defaced papers sent that chilled her. Karen wasn't just making threats anymore. She was escalating. The Sunday morning sun hadn't yet cleared the rooftops when Rachel stepped outside, armed with cleaning supplies. Her mailbox stood like a wounded soldier, its white surface marred by angry streaks of red paint. The vandalized HOA bylaws lay scattered on her lawn, their pages stained and crumpled. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she sprayed the cleaner, but her jaw was set firm. Emily was still asleep, and Rachel was determined to erase all evidence of Karen's intimidation before her daughter woke up. The last thing she wanted was for Emily to carry more worry on her young shoulders. Need some help? Rachel turned to find Mrs. Chen from next door, already in her gardening clothes, watching with concerned eyes. Oh, no thank you, Rachel managed to smile. Just some teenager's idea of a prank, I'm sure. Mrs. Chen's expression said she didn't believe that for a second, but she nodded and began tending to her roses. Rachel was grateful for the quiet companionship as she scrubbed. The screech of expensive tires drew Rachel's attention to the street. Karen's black SUV cruised past, followed by a sleek Mercedes she didn't recognize. They parked in front of the community center, and Rachel's old investigative instincts tingled when she saw Karen hurriedly usher a well-dressed man inside. "That's Douglas Warner," Mrs. Chen whispered, suddenly beside Rachel. "He owns half the real estate companies in town. Never shows up here unless something big is brewing." Rachel nodded, keeping her expression neutral while her mind raced. She finished cleaning the mailbox, then walked casually toward her backyard, which happened to share a fence with the community center's parking lot. The window to Karen's office was cracked open, probably to catch the morning breeze. Rachel busied herself with weeding her garden bed, staying just close enough to hear the conversation floating out. "The demographic shift has to stop," Warner's voice carried clearly. "Property values are at stake. Your HOA has certain discretionary powers that could help maintain the right community profile." "I understand completely." Karen's tone was eager to please. "We're already addressing one situation. The Williams family, they're behind on dues, technically. One more violation and we can begin eviction proceedings." "Excellent. We need to send a message. Can't have this neighborhood going the way of Oakwood Commons." Rachel's stomach clenched. Oakwood Commons was a nearby development that had recently become more racially diverse. So this wasn't just about Jamal's family, it was systematic discrimination wrapped in the language of property values and HOA regulations. "What about that green woman?" Warner asked. "The one causing trouble? Oh, she'll learn her place." Karen's voice dripped with satisfaction. "I'm building a case. Unauthorized gatherings, noise complaints, failure to maintain property standards. Her mortgage is through your bank, isn't it?" "It Island. I'll keep that in mind." Rachel had heard enough. She slipped inside and went straight to her home office. In the back of her closet, behind a box of Emily's old baby clothes, she pulled out a leather-bound journal, a gift from her FBI days. She began documenting everything she'd heard, including dates, times, and exact quotes. Her training kicked in as she outlined the emerging pattern of discrimination and harassment. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Rachel helped Emily with her homework, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy while her mind worked through possible strategies. Around noon, she saw Jamal and his grandmother walking home from church, their Sunday best, a bright spot of color on the sidewalk. Karen's SUV appeared again, driving unnecessarily slow past them. Rachel watched through her window as the teenager's shoulders hunched, his grandmother's hand tightening protectively on his arm. That evening, as Rachel tucked Emily into bed, her daughter's blue eyes were serious in the soft lamplight. "Mom? Are we going to have to move again?" Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing Emily's hair. "No, sweetheart, we don't run from bullies. But Karen is scary and mean. She made Mrs. Williams cry yesterday. Sometimes mean people seem powerful because everyone's too afraid to stand up to them," Rachel explained gently. "But that's exactly why we have to stay and help. Remember what Daddy always said about doing the right thing?" Emily nodded, her face brightening at the mention of her father. "He said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared." "That's exactly right." Rachel pulled the covers up to Emily's chin. "Mom?" Emily wrapped her arms around Rachel's neck in a tight hug. "Daddy would be proud." Rachel held her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo, feeling the truth of those words settle in her heart. When she'd left the FBI, some colleagues had called it throwing away her career. But moments like this reminded her that being Emily's mother was the most important job she'd ever have. Still, as she closed Emily's door and walked downstairs to add more notes to her journal, Rachel knew she couldn't ignore her investigative instincts. Karen and Warner's conversation had confirmed her suspicions This wasn't just personal harassment, but organized discrimination hiding behind HOA rules and regulations. In her journal, she started a new page, listing potential allies in the community. Mrs. Chen, the retired civil rights lawyer, 3 doors down, the young couple who'd brought them dinner last week. Beneath that, she wrote down every instance of selective rule enforcement she'd observed or heard about. The sound of a car door slamming made Rachel glance out her window. Karen was standing in her driveway across the street, speaking into her phone with sharp gestures. Even at this distance, the satisfaction on her face was clear, the face of someone who thought they held all the power, who believed they could bully and threaten without consequences. Rachel's hand tightened on her pen, as she added one final note to her journal. Document everything. The Monday morning air held a crisp bite as Rachel guided her car through the quiet suburban streets. Emily sat in the passenger seat, humming along to the radio while reviewing her spelling words one last time. The normalcy of their morning routine felt like a precious gift after the weekend's events. "Have a wonderful day, sweetie," Rachel said, pulling up to the school drop-off lane. "Remember, I'll pick you up right here at 3. Emily leaned over for a quick hug. "Don't worry so much, Mom. Everything will be okay." Her daughter's innocent wisdom never failed to touch Rachel's heart. As Emily disappeared into the stream of students, Rachel took a deep breath and headed home. The neighborhood streets were beginning to stir with morning activity. Joggers nodding hello, sprinklers clicking rhythmically, the garbage truck making its rounds. But her moment of peace shattered as she pulled into her driveway. A bright orange notice fluttered from a stake planted prominently in her front yard. Rachel's jaw tightened as she stepped out to read it. Notice of violation. Unsafe landscaping conditions. Immediate action required. Rachel surveyed her meticulously maintained yard. The flower beds were neat, the grass freshly mowed, not a hazard in sight. This was harassment, plain and simple. "Quite the eyesore, isn't it?" Karen's voice cut through the morning air. She stood at the edge of Rachel's property, arms crossed, a false concern plastered on her face. Those overgrown bushes could hide all sorts of undesirable elements, like that Williams boy who keeps loitering around. Rachel turned slowly, maintaining her composure despite the anger flaring in her chest. "His name is Jamal, Karen. He's a 15-year-old boy who lives here, not some threat to be eliminated." "Well," Karen's voice dripped with faux sweetness, "we just want to keep our community safe. You understand, being a single mother and all, wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen." Several neighbors had stopped their morning routines to watch the exchange. Mrs. Chen from across the street stood frozen with her mail in hand. Bob Martinez paused while walking his dog. "Let me be very clear," Rachel said, her voice steady and firm. "Your thinly veiled racism and threats stop now. Jamal is a child who deserves to feel safe in his own neighborhood, and my landscaping meets every HOA requirement, as you well know." Karen's face hardened. "You're new here, Rachel. You don't understand how things work. Some people just don't fit in. And those who defend them?" She smiled coldly. "Well, they find it quite difficult to stay." "Is that a threat, Karen?" "Simply an observation." Karen's eyes gleamed. "Though I did hear the school board is very particular about maintaining proper district residency requirements. It would be a shame if someone raised questions about your living situation." Rachel stepped forward, her FBI training surfacing in her controlled stance and unwavering gaze. "Don't ever mention my daughter again." Mrs. Chen suddenly appeared at Rachel's side. "Karen, this is wrong. Rachel and Emily are wonderful neighbors." "Stay out of this, Mai," Karen snapped. "Unless you want your garden decorations reviewed for compliance next." Bob Martinez stepped closer too, his usually cheerful face serious. "Karen, enough. You're out of line." Karen's face flushed red. She jabbed a finger toward Rachel. "You think you've won something here? Just wait. This community has standards, and I intend to maintain them." She spun on her heel and stalked away. The gathered neighbors dispersed slowly, several offering Rachel sympathetic looks or quiet words of support. She thanked them, touched by their kindness but worried about potential retaliation from Karen. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work calls and household tasks. Rachel kept herself busy, trying to shake the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She picked up Emily from school, made dinner, and helped with homework, their evening routine a comforting anchor. Later, after tucking Emily into bed, Rachel headed downstairs for a cup of tea. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the dishwasher. As she crossed the foyer, something caught her eye. A white envelope on the floor, clearly slipped under the front door. Rachel's pulse quickened. She picked it up carefully, noting there was no return address or postmark. Inside was a single typed page. Her hands began to shake as she read, "Your daughter Emily is such a bright student. It would be terrible if something affected her perfect attendance record, or if questions arose about her residency status. Children are so vulnerable, aren't they? Maybe it's time to reconsider your choices and move somewhere more suitable." The paper crumpled in Rachel's grip as she sank into a kitchen chair. Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of fear and fury burning in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. Karen had crossed an unforgivable line. She'd threatened Emily. Rachel stared at the crushed thread in her hands, tears rolling down her cheeks. But beneath the fear, something else was rising, a steely determination she hadn't felt since her FBI days. She'd left that life behind to protect Emily after losing her husband. Now, that same protective instinct was awakening again. The letter trembled in her grip as the tears continued to fall, but her eyes hardened with resolve. Karen had made a crucial mistake. She'd threatened the one thing Rachel would fight to the end, to protect her daughter. Rachel's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had been elusive, her mind churning with worry about the threatening letter mentioning Emily. She pushed back the covers and padded quietly to her bedroom window. The street below lay peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness, but she knew better than to trust that calm. In the kitchen, she started the coffee maker and leaned against the counter, listening to its gentle burbling. The house felt different in these early hours, both peaceful and charged with purpose. She pulled out Emily's favorite cereal bowl and arranged her daughter's lunch items on the counter with mechanical precision, muscle memory from countless mornings. Emily emerged from her room at 6:45, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You're up early, Mom." "Just getting organized, sweetie." Rachel kept her voice light as she poured milk over Emily's cereal. "Big day at school?" "We have our science presentation today." Emily spooned up her breakfast. "Are you okay, Mom? You look tired." Rachel's heart squeezed at her daughter's perceptiveness. "I'm fine, honey. Just thinking about some work I need to do." After seeing Emily safely onto the school bus at 7:30, Rachel returned to her home office. She closed the door, though she was alone in the house, and powered up her laptop. The familiar startup sound felt like a signal to shift gears, from worried mom to investigator. She navigated to the HOA's website, a clunky affair that looked straight out of 2005. The public sections were sparse, but Rachel knew from her FBI days that even the simplest websites could hide valuable information. She clicked through to the resident portal, entering the login credentials she'd received when they first moved in. The financial records section caught her attention first. As she scrolled through meeting minutes and budget reports, certain patterns began to emerge. Karen had been HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, the community improvement budget had nearly tripled. Rachel grabbed a notepad, her handwriting precise as she jotted down figures and dates. The numbers didn't add up. Large sums were being allocated for infrastructure maintenance, but the neighborhood's actual improvements were minimal at best. The tennis courts still had cracks, the community pool needed resurfacing, and the playground equipment showed visible rust. She opened another tab and began searching property records for the county. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from her bureau days kicking in. Cross-referencing addresses with the HOA's violation notices revealed a disturbing pattern. Houses owned by minorities received significantly more citations and fines than others, often for identical issues. Rachel's coffee grew cold beside her as she dug deeper. She discovered a connection between the HOA's chosen contractors and Maxwell Development Group, the company owned by the businessman she'd overheard talking to Karen. The contracts were all just under the threshold that would require competitive bidding, carefully structured to avoid oversight. A quick search revealed that Maxwell Development had a history of discrimination complaints in other communities. They specialized in neighborhood rehabilitation projects that typically resulted in long-time residents being forced out through rising costs and arbitrary regulations. Rachel's jaw clenched as she pieced it together. The HOA wasn't just poorly managed, it was being used as a tool for systematic discrimination. Karen wasn't acting alone. She was part of a larger scheme to reshape the neighborhood's demographics through selective enforcement and financial pressure. She found herself falling back into familiar investigation patterns, creating a timeline of events and connections. The targeting of Jamal's family wasn't random. Their property sat at a crucial corner of the development, and according to county records, Maxwell had already purchased several surrounding parcels. Her printer hummed to life as she began documenting everything. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, violation notices with clear racial patterns, contract documents with Maxwell Development that reeked of kickbacks, email threads between Karen and Maxwell executives archived in the HOA's cloud storage discussing neighborhood improvement strategies in coded language that made Rachel's skin crawl. As the stack of papers grew, Rachel felt a mix of triumph and dread. She had evidence of serious misconduct, possibly criminal activity, but exposing it would make her an even bigger target. She thought of Emily's bright smile at breakfast and steeled her resolve. Some fights were worth the risk. The loose floorboard in her closet had been her hiding place since they moved in, a habit from her FBI days of always having a secure spot for sensitive documents. She knelt down now, working the board free with practiced fingers. Inside lay her old badge, her husband's letters, and now she added the stack of damning evidence. As she replaced the floorboard, Rachel ran her fingers over its smooth surface. The evidence was safe for now, but she knew this was just the beginning. She'd opened a door that couldn't be closed, uncovered a truth that demanded action. Her FBI training had taught her to follow evidence wherever it led, but her maternal instincts reminded her that every move had to be calculated with Emily's safety in mind. Rachel stood up and brushed off her knees, glancing at her watch. Almost time for Emily's school day to end. She'd need to push aside her investigator persona and return to being just Mom, at least for now. But the weight of what she'd discovered settled around her shoulders like a familiar coat, heavy with responsibility, but oddly comforting in its certainty. She shut down her laptop and straightened her desk, erasing all signs of her morning's work. The floorboard held its secrets, and Rachel held hers. Each piece of evidence another step toward justice, in a battle she hadn't chosen but couldn't ignore. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Rachel's front yard as she walked up the cracked sidewalk to Jamal's grandmother's modest one-story home. Her heart ached at the sight of multiple HOA violation notices taped to the front door, their harsh red lettering visible even from a distance. Mrs. Williams opened the door before Rachel could knock, her warm brown eyes crinkling with a gentle smile despite the worry lines etched around them. "Come in, dear. I've got a fresh pot of tea waiting." The living room was small but immaculate, filled with carefully preserved furniture and family photos. Rachel settled onto a well-worn floral couch, while Mrs. Williams poured tea into delicate china cups that looked like family heirlooms. "I've been wanting to thank you properly for standing up for my Jamal," Mrs. Williams said, her hands trembling slightly as she handed Rachel a cup. "Not many folks around here would have done that." Rachel wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. "I couldn't stand by and watch, but I sensed this wasn't the first incident." Mrs. Williams sank into her armchair, shoulders heavy with untold stories. "Oh, honey, Karen's been making our lives difficult since the day we moved in. First, it was complaints about my roses being too tall, then my mailbox being the wrong shade of black." She shook her head, but when Jamal came to live with me after his mama passed, that's when things got real ugly. "I'm so sorry," Rachel said softly, her heart breaking for this gentlewoman and her grandson. Last month, she had the nerve to say my Christmas decorations from December were still up in January because we're lazy. Truth was, I'd fallen and couldn't take them down myself, and Jamal was too scared to use the ladder after Karen threatened to report him for suspicious activity the last time he tried. A knock at the door made them both jump. Rachel's FBI instincts kicked in, but Mrs. Williams relaxed when she peeked through the curtains. "It's just Sarah from next door." Sarah Turner, a middle-aged woman Rachel recognized from the HOA meeting, entered with an apologetic smile. "I saw you heading this way, Rachel. I've been wanting to talk to both of you." Soon, Sarah was perched on the edge of the couch, clutching her own teacup. "I should have spoken up at that meeting," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Karen's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Last summer, she tried to fine me for having a rainbow flag in my garden during Pride Month. Said it wasn't an approved decoration." The afternoon stretched on as more neighbors trickled in, each with their own story. Beth Martinez from down the street shared how Karen had threatened to report her home-based tamale business. Tom Wilson, a retired teacher, admitted Karen had manipulated the HOA board into rejecting his disability accommodation request for a front yard ramp. Rachel listened, her investigator's mind piecing together a pattern of discrimination and abuse of power. But more than that, she saw something powerful happening. People finding their voices, sharing their pain, and realizing they weren't alone. Around 4 o'clock, the front door burst open with the energy only children could bring. Emily bounded in, followed by a slightly more hesitant Jamal. Rachel had arranged for them to walk home together after school. "Mom, Jamal showed me his awesome comic book collection, and guess what? He draws his own superheroes." Emily's excitement lit up the room. "Can he stay and show me more?" Rachel glanced at Mrs. Williams, who nodded with grateful tears in her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. Why don't you two set up at the dining room table?" The adults watched as the children spread out their books and art supplies, their laughter a stark contrast to the heavy conversations of the afternoon. Jamal seemed to shed years of tension as he explained his latest superhero creation to an enthralled Emily. "That's the first time I've seen him really smile in months," Mrs. Williams whispered. Beth Martinez reached over and squeezed her hand. "We should have done this sooner. Come together, I mean." Tom Wilson cleared his throat. "You know what my mama always said? Prayer changes things. Maybe we could pray together?" Rachel felt a surge of emotion as heads nodded around the room. They formed a circle, joining hands, young and old, different races and backgrounds, united in their need for strength and hope. Mrs. Williams started, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Dear Lord, we come before you today as your children, seeking your guidance and protection. Give us courage to stand against injustice." One by one, they added their own prayers. For protection, for wisdom, for the strength to stand together. Even Emily and Jamal joined the circle, their small hands clasped tightly together. As the final Amen faded, Rachel opened her eyes to see sunshine streaming through the windows, bathing the room in warm light. The fear and isolation that had gripped their neighborhood for so long seemed to lift, replaced by something powerful, hope, born of unity and faith. Looking around the circle of tearful smiles and strengthened spirits, Rachel knew they had found something Karen could never defeat, the power of community bound together by love and courage. "We're not alone anymore," Mrs. Williams said softly, voicing what everyone felt. "And that changes everything." The children had returned to their drawings, but now they were creating something new. A superhero team, Jamal explained, that worked together to protect their neighborhood. Rachel watched them, these innocent souls untouched by prejudice, showing the adults the simple truth: they were stronger together. The community clubhouse buzzed with tension as residents filed in for the Wednesday evening HOA meeting. Rachel smoothed her navy blazer, a remnant from her FBI days that still gave her confidence. She chose a seat near the middle of the room, neither hiding in the back nor appearing confrontational up front. Karen stood at the podium in her signature pearl necklace and pressed pantsuit, shuffling papers with manicured fingers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she called the meeting to order. "First item of business," Karen announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We need to address recent disruptions in our community." Her gaze locked onto Rachel. "Some residents seem to think they're above our rules and regulations." Rachel sat straight-backed but relaxed, years of interrogation training helping her maintain a neutral expression. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Miss Green," Karen continued, emphasizing the "miss" with subtle disdain, "would you care to explain why you've been hosting unauthorized gatherings? Your constant visitors are disturbing the peace." A few gasps scattered through the room. Rachel knew Karen was referring to the afternoon when neighbors had stopped by for cookies, a perfectly normal, neighborly activity. "I wasn't aware that having friends over for cookies required HOA approval," Rachel replied evenly, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Perhaps we could review which bylaw covers afternoon tea." A few nervous chuckles broke the tension. Karen's smile tightened. "Don't play coy, Miss Green. Your disruptive behavior and encouragement of certain elements in our community have been well documented." Karen pulled out a folder. "I have here multiple complaints about noise, unauthorized landscaping, and suspicious activity." Rachel stood slowly, her movements deliberate. "Speaking of documentation," she said, pulling out her own manila folder, "I've been reviewing the HOA financial reports. Very interesting reading." Karen's face flickered with something that looked like fear before she recovered. "The financial reports are not on tonight's agenda. Actually," Rachel stepped into the center aisle, "according to Bylaw 7.3, any resident may raise concerns about HOA finances during open discussion. I've noticed some concerning patterns in the allocation of maintenance funds." The room grew quiet. Rachel could feel the shift in atmosphere as neighbors leaned forward in their seats. "For instance," Rachel continued, opening her folder, "last month's report shows 15,000 allocated for landscape improvements on Maple Street. But having walked that street daily, I haven't seen any improvements. Would you care to explain where that money went, Karen?" Karen's face flushed red. "How dare you question? I'm simply asking for transparency," Rachel interrupted calmly. "As is my right, as a dues-paying member of this association." A man in the back raised his hand. "I live on Maple Street. We haven't had any landscaping done in months." Another resident stood up. "What about the 10,000 for pool maintenance? The pool's been green for weeks." Karen banged her gavel. "This is not the proper forum for—" "Actually," said Mrs. Chen from the front row, "this is exactly the proper forum. I move that we conduct a full audit of HOA expenses." "I second that motion," called another voice. Karen's composure cracked. Her hands shook as she gathered her papers. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced shrilly. "You can't adjourn during a motion," Rachel pointed out, "according to Bylaw 4.2. "This is ridiculous," Karen snapped. She gestured to her assistant, a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses. "Come on, Richard, we're leaving." As Karen stormed toward the exit, she paused briefly beside her associate, whispering through clenched teeth, "She won't last here." The door slammed behind them, leaving the room in stunned silence. Then, gradually, people began to talk, forming small clusters of animated discussion. Rachel found herself surrounded by neighbors, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner, others sharing their own stories of Karen's intimidation. Mrs. Chen touched Rachel's arm. "Thank you for saying what many of us have been too afraid to say." Rachel nodded, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. She'd taken a stand, and for the first time, the community was standing with her. But Karen's parting words echoed in her mind, carrying the weight of a promise rather than a threat. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Rachel's backyard as she steadied the ladder for Emily, who stretched up to hang twinkling string lights between the oak trees. The warm breeze carried the promise of a perfect evening, rustling through the leaves and making the lights dance. "A little to the left, sweetie," Rachel called up, her heart swelling with pride, as Emily carefully secured each strand. "Perfect!" Emily beamed down at her mother. "Do you think people will really come, Mom?" "They'll come," Rachel assured her, though her own stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. She glanced at her watch, just an hour until the cookout was set to begin. The back door creaked open as Jamal emerged, carrying a stack of paper plates and plastic cups. "Mrs. Green, my grandmother's on her way, with her famous potato salad," he announced, his usual shyness giving way to excitement. "Thank you, Jamal." Rachel smiled warmly. "Would you mind helping Emily with those last few lights while I check on the grill?" As Rachel fired up the charcoal, neighbors began trickling in through the side gate. The Martinez family arrived first, their arms loaded with homemade enchiladas and fresh guacamole. Mrs. Chen followed shortly after with spring rolls, and the Williams brought several foil-covered dishes that filled the air with the mouth-watering aroma of Southern cooking. Soon the backyard hummed with conversation and laughter. Children chased each other across the grass, while adults gathered around tables laden with food from different cultures. Rachel's heart lifted as she watched Mr. Rodriguez, a quiet man who usually kept to himself, enthusiastically explaining his tamale recipe to Mrs. Williams. "This is wonderful," Mrs. Chen said, appearing at Rachel's side. "It's been years since we've had anything like this in the neighborhood." Rachel nodded, flipping burgers on the grill. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to open their door. As the sky deepened to purple, more lights clicked on around the yard, creating a warm glow that seemed to embrace everyone present. Rachel noticed how Jamal had found his place among a group of teens, his usual tension melting away as they shared jokes and stories. Emily tugged at Rachel's sleeve. "Mom, can Jamal and I do our song now, before it gets too dark?" Rachel gathered everyone's attention, and the crowd formed a loose circle around the makeshift performance space near the back porch. Emily and Jamal had been practicing all week, a simple duet they'd learned in music class. As their young voices rose in harmony, Rachel watched faces around the circle soften. Mrs. Williams dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, and even Mr. Chen, known for his stoic demeanor, swayed gently to the music. The song spoke of friendship and hope, and in that moment, it felt like a perfect anthem for their gathering. When the final note faded, applause erupted, genuine and warm. Jamal's grandmother pulled both children into a tight hug, whispering words that made them giggle and beam with pride. The evening continued to unfold like a gift. Rachel found herself drawn into conversation after conversation, each one revealing the deep wells of kindness in her neighbors. Mr. Martinez shared stories about his grandfather's village in Mexico. Mrs. Williams talked about her dreams of starting a community garden. Even shy Mr. Chen opened up about his journey from Shanghai to their little suburb. As night settled in completely, someone produced sparklers for the children. Rachel watched as Emily and Jamal ran through the yard with their friends, leaving trails of light in their wake. Their laughter mixed with the soft crackle of the sparklers, creating a melody of joy that seemed to float up toward the stars. A series of pops and whistles drew everyone's attention skyward. The local park's weekly summer fireworks display had begun, painting the sky in brilliant bursts of color. Families spread blankets on the grass, children settled into parents' laps, and a collective hush fell over the gathering. Rachel found herself seated between Emily and Jamal, with his grandmother on his other side. As red and gold sparks showered across the dark canvas above, she felt Emily's small hand slip into hers. "Mom," Emily whispered, "this is the best night ever." Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling tears prick at her corners of her eyes, not tears of sadness or fear, but of pure gratitude. For the first time since moving to the neighborhood, since losing her husband, since facing Karen's threats, she felt the full weight of blessing surrounding her. In that moment, as another burst of fireworks illuminated the faces of her neighbors, now friends, Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Her heart lifted in a silent prayer of thanksgiving, not just for this evening but for the reminder that love truly could overcome fear, that community could triumph over division, that light would always find a way to pierce through darkness. She opened her eyes to watch another explosion of color paint the sky, and in its glow she saw what she'd hoped for all along. People from every background, every walk of life, sharing in the simple joy of being together. Children who'd never played together before were now fast friends. Adults who'd barely exchanged hellos were sharing food and stories like old companions. The fireworks continued their display overhead, but the real magic was happening right here in her backyard. As Rachel breathed in the warm night air, filled with the mingled scents of good food and summer flowers, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was what community should be. Not rules and threats and divisions, but open hearts and shared laughter under a canopy of stars. The morning sun barely touched the treetops when 3 sharp knocks echoed through Rachel's home. She was still in her kitchen robe, savoring the warmth of her morning coffee and the sweet memories of last night's successful community gathering. Emily sat at the breakfast table, humming the tune she'd performed with Jamal. Rachel opened the front door, her smile fading instantly. 2 police officers stood on her porch, their expressions stern. Behind them, a woman in a gray pantsuit clutched a leather portfolio to her chest. "Mrs. Green?" the taller officer asked, his badge glinting in the morning light. "I'm Officer Martinez. This is Officer Chen. We need to speak with you regarding some serious allegations." Rachel's heart thundered in her chest, but her FBI training kicked in. She kept her voice steady. "Of course. May I ask what this is about?" The woman in the pantsuit stepped forward. "I'm Susan Brooks, from Child Protective Services. We've received some concerning reports about your household." Rachel's fingers tightened on the doorframe. She could hear Emily's spoon clinking against her cereal bowl in the kitchen, blissfully unaware. "Please, come in," she managed, her throat tight. "My daughter is having breakfast. Could we speak quietly?" They followed her to the living room, where family photos lined the walls. Emily's school pictures, memories of happier times with her late husband. Rachel perched on the edge of the armchair, her back straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "Mrs. Green," Officer Martinez began, "we've received reports of violent behavior and potential child endangerment. A neighbor filed a formal complaint, claiming you've been hosting unauthorized gatherings where alcohol was served with minors present." Rachel's jaw clenched. Karen's handiwork was obvious. "That's absolutely false," she said firmly. "Last night's gathering was a family-friendly community cookout. There was no alcohol, and the children were supervised at all times." Miss Brooks opened her portfolio. "We have statements suggesting you've been exhibiting erratic behavior, making threats against neighbors, and creating an unstable environment for your daughter." She paused, her pen hovering over her notepad. "There are also concerns about unknown individuals frequenting your home." "Mom?" Emily's small voice came from the kitchen doorway. Rachel's heart sank as she saw her daughter's wide, frightened eyes taking in the scene. "What's happening?" "Emily, sweetie." Rachel started, but Emily's gaze locked onto Miss Brooks's portfolio, understanding dawning on her young face. She'd seen enough TV shows to recognize what was happening. "No," Emily cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. She ran to Rachel, throwing her arms around her mother's waist. "You can't take me away from my mom, please!" Rachel pulled Emily close, fighting back her own tears. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, sweetheart. These people just need to ask Mommy some questions." Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Mrs. Green." "Miss," Brooks said, her tone softening slightly at Emily's distress. "We're required to investigate all reports thoroughly. Could you walk us through your typical daily routine?" For the next hour, Rachel answered questions about Emily's schooling, their home life, their support system. She provided Emily's perfect attendance records, showed them the fully stocked kitchen, explained her work-from-home schedule that allowed her to be there for her daughter. All while Emily sat pressed against her side, occasionally hiccuping with suppressed sobs. Officer Chen explored the house, finding nothing but a well-maintained, loving home. He noted the educational books on the shelves, the art supplies neatly organized in Emily's room, the family emergency contact list posted by the phone. "One more thing," Miss Brooks said, reviewing her notes. "There are allegations about your mental state following your husband's death. Have you sought any counseling?" Rachel's hand tightened around Emily's shoulder. "Yes," she answered steadily. "Both Emily and I attended grief counseling for a year after John's passing. I can provide you with Dr. Marshall's contact information." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officials prepared to leave. Miss Brooks handed Rachel her card. "We'll need to conduct follow-up interviews, Mrs. Green, and we'll be speaking with Emily's teachers and your neighbors. Rachel nodded, standing on shaky legs. "Of course. Whatever you need." Once the front door closed, Rachel's composure crumbled. She sank onto the couch, pulling Emily into her lap despite her daughter being almost too big for it now. They clung to each other, both trembling. "Mom?" Emily whispered against Rachel's shoulder. "It was Mrs. Whitfield, wasn't it? She did this because of our party last night?" Rachel closed her eyes, pressing her lips to Emily's hair. "Yes, sweetheart. But we're going to be okay. I promise you." "I'm scared," Emily admitted, her fingers clutching Rachel's robe. "What if they believe her lies?" "They won't," Rachel said, but her own fear churned in her stomach. Karen had crossed an unforgivable line, wielding the system itself as a weapon against them. This wasn't just about property violations or social standing anymore. This was an attempt to destroy their family. Emily eventually fell into an exhausted sleep against Rachel's chest, worn out from crying. Rachel sat there, holding her precious daughter, staring at the business card Miss Brooks had left on the coffee table. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, her throat tight with rage and terror. The morning light filled the room, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, making everything seem surreal. The happy photos on the walls now felt like they were mocking her. The remains of their interrupted breakfast sat abandoned in the kitchen, milk souring in Emily's cereal bowl. Rachel's hand shook as she smoothed Emily's hair, remembering how just last night they'd been surrounded by friendship and hope. Now, in the harsh light of morning, Karen's true vindictiveness had been revealed. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was an attempt to take everything that mattered. She looked down at her sleeping daughter's tear-stained face and felt the weight of helplessness pressing down on her chest. All her FBI training, all her strength and determination seemed inadequate in the face of this new threat. Karen had found their most vulnerable point and struck without mercy. Carefully shifting Emily to lie on the couch, Rachel covered her with the throw blanket. She collapsed into the nearby armchair, her body feeling like lead, her mind racing with fears she couldn't silence. The morning ticked by, marked only by the steady ticking of the clock and Emily's quiet breathing, while Rachel sat motionless, overwhelmed by the knowledge that their peaceful life hung by a thread. The first rays of dawn painted Rachel's bedroom ceiling in shades of pale gold, but she hadn't noticed the night slipping away. She sat in the old rocking chair by Emily's bed, watching her daughter's peaceful breathing. Emily's favorite stuffed bear was tucked under her arm, her dark curls spread across the pillow like a halo. Rachel's eyes burned from exhaustion, but sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed them, she saw the CPS worker's stern face, heard the police officer's questions echoing in her mind. The threat of losing Emily hung over her like a storm cloud, making her chest tight with fear. Emily stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep, and Rachel's heart clenched. How could she protect her baby girl from this nightmare? The thought of Emily being questioned by strangers, having to defend her mother, it was too much to bear. Rachel pulled her worn prayer journal from her robe pocket, running her fingers over its leather cover. The pages were filled with her hopes, fears, and conversations with God since moving here. Since Mark's death, it had become her confidant, her anchor in the storm. "Maybe we should just go," she whispered to herself, careful not to wake Emily. The morning light caught the silver frame on Emily's nightstand, a photo of the three of them, taken just months before Mark's accident. His smile was so bright, so full of life. "What would you do, honey? How do I keep her safe?" The sound of small stones hitting her window pulled Rachel from her thoughts. She crossed to the window, drawing back the curtain to find Jamal standing in her backyard, worry etched across his young face. He gestured toward the back door. Rachel glanced at Emily, still sleeping soundly, then quietly made her way downstairs. When she opened the back door, Jamal's usual shy demeanor was replaced with urgent determination. "Mrs. Green," he whispered, shifting from foot to foot on her back porch. "My grandma told me what happened yesterday, about the police and everything." Rachel's throat tightened. "Jamal, you shouldn't worry about—" "But I do worry," he interrupted, his voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. My grandma's been crying. She says if you leave, there's no one left to stand up to Mrs. Whitfield. His eyes met hers, filled with a wisdom beyond his 15 years. If you give up, what hope do we have? The words hit Rachel like a physical force. She sank onto the porch swing, patting the space beside her. Jamal sat, his shoulders tense. Karen, Mrs. Whitfield. She's been doing this for years, he continued. Before us, it was the Martinez family. Before them, the Kims. She finds ways to make people leave if they don't fit her idea of who belongs here. He pulled at a loose thread on his sleeve. But you're different. You're not afraid of her. Rachel let out a shaky laugh. Oh, Jamal, I am afraid. Terrified, actually. But you still stand up to her. Like my grandma says, being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. Through the kitchen window, Rachel could see Emily's empty cereal bowl from yesterday still sitting in the sink. The string lights from Friday's gathering still hung in the backyard, testament to a moment when the community had come together in defiance of Karen's hatred. My dad, Rachel said softly. Emily's father. He used to say that evil wins when good people do nothing. She turned to Jamal. He was right. And so are you. Jamal's face brightened slightly. So you're not leaving? Rachel stood up, straightening her shoulders. No, we're not leaving. She gestured toward the house. Would you like some breakfast? Emily will be up soon. Thanks, Mrs. Green, but I should get back before Grandma worries. He started down the steps, then turned back. Mrs. Green, thank you. For everything. After Jamal left, Rachel returned to her bedroom. Emily was still sleeping, her face serene in the growing morning light. Instead of sitting in the rocking chair again, Rachel knelt beside her bed, clasping her hands together. Lord, she whispered, tears finally falling freely. I'm so scared. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this fight. But I know you didn't bring us here by accident. Her voice broke. Please, give me the strength to face what's coming, to be the mother Emily needs, to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. She stayed there, letting the tears flow, surrendering her fear to something greater than herself. The morning sun warmed her face through the window, and gradually, a sense of peace settled over her. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it. Rising from her knees, Rachel walked to her closet and pulled out the locked box where she kept her journal of evidence. Inside were financial records, photographs, testimonies from neighbors, a paper trail of Karen's corruption and discrimination. She'd been gathering it quietly, methodically, her FBI training serving her well. She sat at her small desk, opening the journal one last time. The pages were filled with her neat handwriting, each entry a piece of the puzzle showing Karen's true nature. Rachel added a final note about yesterday's false accusations, then closed the journal firmly. Emily stirred in her bed, yawning. Mommy, are you okay? Rachel turned to her daughter, managing a genuine smile. Yes, sweetheart, I am. And for the first time since the police had shown up at their door, she truly meant it. Monday morning arrived with a gentle drizzle, the kind that made the world feel fresh and new. Rachel's kitchen filled with the aroma of fresh coffee as her small group of allies gathered around her worn oak table. Steam rose from their mugs, like morning fog, curling in the air between them. Mrs. Thompson, Jamal's grandmother, sat with her weathered hands wrapped around her cup, her wise eyes fixed on Rachel. Next to her, Sarah Martinez from 2 doors down, dabbed nervously at a coffee stain on her sleeve. Bob Chen, whose family had lived in the neighborhood for 3 generations, leaned forward in his chair, his usually cheerful face creased with concern. Thank you all for coming, Rachel said, her voice steady, despite the weight of what she was about to share. Before I show you what I've found, there's something you need to know about me. She took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I'm not just a single mom who moved here for a fresh start. Before Emily, before my husband's death, I was an FBI special agent. The kitchen fell silent. Sarah's mouth dropped open, and Bob nearly knocked over his coffee. Lord have mercy, Mrs. Thompson whispered, a slow smile spreading across her face. I knew there was something special about you, child. Rachel pulled out a worn leather folder from beneath the kitchen counter. My training never really left me. When Karen started her campaign against us, I began investigating. She spread documents across the table, financial records, emails, meeting minutes. The HOA funds aren't just being mismanaged, they're being funneled into discriminatory housing practices. Bob adjusted his glasses, squinting at the papers. These numbers don't add up. The maintenance fees are inflated, but where's the extra money going? Here. Rachel pointed to a series of transactions. To shell companies owned by Marcus Davidson, the real estate developer who's been buying up properties in minority neighborhoods. Mrs. Thompson's hands trembled as she reached for one of the documents. So, that's why they've been pressing so hard to get us out. They're not just bullies, they're criminals. Sarah stood up suddenly, pacing the kitchen. But Rachel, after what Karen did with CPS, this is dangerous. She could hurt you, hurt Emily. She already is hurting us, Rachel replied firmly. Not just my family but all of us. Jamal, Mrs. Thompson. Anyone who doesn't fit their perfect little picture. She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, her allies caught a glimpse of the FBI agent she used to be. I won't let fear of her stop me from doing what's right. Bob nodded slowly, his expression hardening with resolve. The next HOA meeting is Wednesday evening. If we present this evidence together, we'll stand with you, Mrs. Thompson declared, reaching across the table to grasp Rachel's hand. All of us. It's about time somebody shed light on what's really happening here. Sarah stopped pacing and returned to the table. Count me in. My parents came to this country for a better life, not to face more discrimination. They spent the next hour reviewing the evidence, planning their approach. Rachel explained how each piece fit together, showing them the pattern of corruption that Karen had tried so hard to hide. Their determination grew stronger with each revelation. As the meeting wound down, Mrs. Thompson pulled Rachel into a tight hug. You're not alone anymore, honey. We've got your back. Bob squeezed her shoulder as he headed for the door. We'll see this through together. Sarah lingered behind, helping Rachel gather the documents. You know, she said softly, when you first moved in, I was too scared to even say hello. Karen had everyone so intimidated. But watching you stand up to her, it gave us courage. After they left, Rachel heard Emily's footsteps on the stairs. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed bear. Were those your friends, Mom? Emily asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Rachel crossed the kitchen and pulled Emily into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. Yes, baby, they're our friends, and they're going to help us make things right. Emily snuggled closer. Is Karen still trying to hurt us? Rachel held her daughter tighter, her voice firm but gentle. This ends soon, baby girl, I promise. The afternoon sun filtered through the classroom windows at Lincoln Middle School, casting long shadows across empty desks. The final bell had rung 15 minutes ago, but Jamal remained seated, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Rachel sat in a chair beside him, while Emily perched on a desk nearby, swinging her legs gently. Take your time, Rachel said softly. Just tell it exactly as it happened. Jamal nodded, drawing a deep breath. His shoulders tensed as he began to speak. I was just walking home from the library, like I always do on Thursdays. His voice trembled slightly. Mr. Peterson, he came out of nowhere. Started yelling about how I didn't belong in the neighborhood. Emily stopped swinging her legs, her face clouding with concern for her friend. Rachel maintained her calm presence, giving Jamal an encouraging nod. It's okay to be nervous, Rachel assured him. But remember, your truth is powerful. No one can take that away from you. Jamal's fingers unclenched slightly. He grabbed my backpack, threw it in the bushes, said I must have stolen the books inside. His voice grew stronger as he continued. But I didn't run. I remembered what my grandma always says. Stand tall in your truth. Emily slipped off her desk and moved closer, placing her small hand on Jamal's shoulder. You're the bravest person I know, she said with the pure conviction only a child could muster. A ghost of a smile crossed Jamal's face. Thanks, Em. Rachel leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. When you speak at the meeting tomorrow, some people might try to interrupt you, but you have every right to be heard. Take your time, speak clearly, and remember, you're not alone. What if Karen tries to twist my words? Jamal asked, worry creasing his forehead. Then we'll untwist them right back, Emily declared, making both Rachel and Jamal crack genuine smiles. Rachel pulled out a notebook. Let's practice handling tough questions. The more prepared you feel, the more confident you'll be. She adjusted her position, adopting a sterner expression. Young man, are you sure you weren't causing trouble that day? Jamal straightened in his chair. No, ma'am. I was walking home from the library, where I go every Thursday to study. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, can confirm this. I had 3 books checked out, all for my history project. Good, Rachel nodded approvingly. Direct, specific, and calm. That's perfect. They continued practicing for another hour. With each run-through, Jamal's voice grew steadier, his responses more confident. Emily occasionally chimed in with suggestions, her innocent perspective cutting straight to the heart of matters in a way that made complex situations simple. Remember when you helped me with my math homework? Emily asked suddenly. You explained everything so clearly. Just do that tomorrow. Explain things like you're teaching math. Jamal chuckled. Math is a lot easier than this, Em, but it's the same thing, she insisted. You just tell the truth, step by step, like solving a problem. Rachel watched the interaction with warm pride. Her daughter's simple wisdom often amazed her. How Emily could cut through fear and doubt with pure, childlike faith. As the afternoon light began to fade, they packed up their things. Jamal stood straighter now, his earlier nervousness replaced with quiet determination. Mrs. Green? He said as they walked toward the parking lot. Thank you. For everything, Rachel smiled. You don't need to thank me, Jamal. Standing up for what's right is its own reward. But you didn't have to help me, he continued. You could have just ignored everything, like everyone else did. That's not who my mom is, Emily stated, matter-of-factly, skipping ahead of them. She always says, doing nothing when you see wrong is like helping the wrong win. Jamal nodded thoughtfully. They reached Rachel's car, where his grandmother would be picking him up soon. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a peaceful contrast to the weight of tomorrow's challenge. Mrs. Green? Jamal said, his voice firm and clear. I won't let her scare me anymore. Rachel saw the strength in his young face, the same quiet courage that had been there all along, just waiting to be recognized and nurtured. In that moment she knew without doubt that truth would prevail, not through force or fear, but through the simple power of one brave voice speaking up. The community clubhouse buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. The usual metal folding chairs weren't enough. People stood along the walls, whispering among themselves. The room felt smaller than ever, packed with concerned faces and racing hearts. Karen Whitfield sat at the head table, perfectly coiffed as always, her red blazer like a warning sign against the beige walls. Her fingers drummed against the polished wood, a steady beat of assumed authority. She watched each person enter with the practiced smile of someone who believed they held all the cards. Rachel Green slipped in quietly through the side door, her daughter Emily's hand clasped tightly in hers. Behind them came Jamal Williams and his grandmother, their heads held high despite the stares. Rachel squeezed Emily's hand one last time before the girl went to sit with Jamal's grandmother in the third row. I see we have quite the turnout tonight, Karen announced, her voice carrying that familiar false warmth. Let's begin with the usual. Actually, Rachel stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. I believe there are some pressing matters we need to address first. She carried a manila folder, worn at the edges from constant review. Karen's smile tightened. The agenda has already been set, Mrs. Green. Miss, Rachel corrected gently. And according to HOA bylaws, Section 4.3, any resident may bring urgent business to the floor with the support of 10 other homeowners. She gestured to the row where her allies sat, their hands raised in silent support. I believe I have more than that. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's fingers stopped their drumming. Very well, Karen said through clenched teeth. You have 5 minutes. Rachel walked to the center of the room, her steps measured and calm. She opened her folder and began laying out documents on the table. These are financial records from the past 3 years of HOA management. Her voice carried easily, years of FBI briefing experience, evident in her tone. I'd like to draw your attention to several concerning patterns. She began methodically pointing out discrepancies, inflated maintenance costs, mysterious consulting fees, and most damning of all, selective enforcement of rules based on residents' backgrounds. The room grew quieter with each revelation, the only sound, the rustle of papers as people passed them around, examining the evidence themselves. This is absurd, Karen interrupted, her face flushing. These documents are clearly fabricated. They're certified copies from the county records office, Rachel countered smoothly. And I have witnesses ready to testify about the pattern of discrimination. She turned to the crowd. But before we hear from them, there's someone else who deserves to be heard. Jamal stood up slowly, his shoulders straight despite the slight tremor in his hands. He made his way to the front, past the rows of faces now turned toward him. Rachel gave him an encouraging nod. My name is Jamal Williams, he began, his voice quiet but growing stronger with each word. 2 months ago, I was assaulted outside this very building for, as they put it, loitering. I was actually waiting for my grandmother to finish her volunteer shift at the community library. The room held its breath as Jamal described the incident, the slurs, the shoves, the fear, but more than that, he spoke about the pattern of harassment that followed, the way Karen had dismissed his grandmother's complaints, the threatening notes left on their door. Miss Green was the only one who stood up for me that day, Jamal continued, his voice steady now. She showed me that one person's courage can give others the strength to speak up too. More residents began standing up, sharing their own stories of intimidation and selective enforcement. A Latino family described excessive fines for imaginary violations. An elderly widow spoke about being pressured to sell her home below market value to Karen's associate, the local real estate developer. Karen's face had gone from red to white. This is preposterous. I've served this community faithfully for years. She shuffled through her own papers, hands shaking. These people are just upset about being held to our standards that seem to change depending on who you're dealing with, Rachel interjected, producing more documents. Here's evidence of identical violations being handled differently based on the resident's race or economic status. And here, she laid down another paper, is proof of kickbacks from that developer you've been steering properties to. The whispers grew louder. Someone in the back called out, "We need to call the police! This is a witch hunt!" Karen stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. I won't stand for these baseless accusations. She grabbed her designer purse, papers spilling from her grip as she backed toward the door. The evidence has already been submitted to the proper authorities, Rachel said calmly. Running won't help, Karen. But Karen wasn't listening anymore. She shoved past the crowd, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor as she fled. The door slammed behind her, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. The whispers started again, growing louder. "Remove her from the board," someone shouted. "Call an emergency election," added another. The room buzzed with anger and shock as people continued passing around the evidence, pointing out details they recognized from their own experiences. Rachel stood quietly at the front, watching as years of Karen's carefully constructed control crumbled in minutes. Emily ran up to her, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. Jamal rejoined his grandmother, who wiped tears from her eyes as she hugged him close. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges as Rachel stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug warming her hands. The familiar quiet of early morning shattered as news vans rolled down Maple Avenue, their satellite dishes stretching toward the sky like metal trees. She watched them park, one after another, their logos bright against the muted morning light. "Mommy?" Emily's sleepy voice came from behind her. "Why are there so many trucks outside?" Rachel turned, setting her coffee down to wrap her daughter in a warm hug. "Remember how we talked about standing up to bullies? Well, sometimes when people do the right thing, others want to tell that story." Blue and red lights flickered through the window, casting dancing shadows across their faces. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of Karen's house down the street. Emily pressed her face against the cool glass, curiosity overwhelming her morning drowsiness. "Is Mrs. Whitfield in trouble?" she asked, her breath fogging the window. Rachel gently pulled Emily away from the window. "How about some breakfast? I'm thinking blueberry pancakes." As Rachel mixed the batter, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, a knock at the door made her pause. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, wringing her hands nervously. "Rachel, you should see this," she said when Rachel opened the door. "They're taking Karen away for questioning. Something about illegal property schemes and discrimination." Emily appeared at Rachel's side, and she instinctively placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. Through the doorway, they could see Karen being escorted to a police car, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her face set in a hard mask of defiance. Neighbors emerged from their homes, some still in robes and slippers, watching in stunned silence. "Let's finish making breakfast," Rachel said softly, steering Emily back inside. But before she could close the door, Jamal's grandmother approached, tears in her eyes. "You did this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You stood up when nobody else would. Thank you." She pulled Rachel into a tight hug. More neighbors began gathering on Rachel's front lawn. Mr. Chen, from across the street, brought fresh-baked rolls. The Martinez family arrived with coffee for everyone. What started as a spectacle of Karen's downfall transformed into an impromptu community gathering. Inside, Rachel kept Emily occupied with pancake making, but she couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation through the open window. Words like federal investigation, discriminatory housing practices, and years of corruption floated in on the morning breeze. Jamal appeared at the back door, knocking softly. Emily's face lit up at the sight of her friend, and Rachel welcomed him in. "My grandma said I should thank you," he said, shuffling his feet. "But I wanted to thank you anyway, for believing me, for making me brave." Rachel felt her eyes well up. "You were always brave, Jamal. You just needed someone to remind you." The morning wore on, and news reporters attempted to approach the house several times. Rachel, firmly but politely, declined interviews, protecting Emily from the circus outside. She watched through the window as Karen's husband arrived home, face ashen, rushing past the media frenzy with a briefcase clutched to his chest. By afternoon, the police had come and gone, the news vans began to thin out, and a semblance of calm returned to the neighborhood. But it was a different kind of calm. Lighter, cleaner, as if a storm had washed away years of accumulated tension. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a cleanup crew to remove the last of Karen's spiteful HOA violation notices from various front doors. The Martinez kids helped Emily and Jamal plant flowers in the community garden, the same garden Karen had tried to shut down months ago. As evening approached, Rachel sat with Emily on their front porch swing, watching the last news van pack up and drive away. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a beautiful end to a transformative day. "Can we have hot cocoa?" Emily asked, snuggling closer to her mother as the evening air grew cool. Inside, Rachel moved through their familiar routine, warming milk on the stove, adding chocolate and a pinch of cinnamon, just the way Emily's father used to make it. The simple act felt like a celebration, a quiet acknowledgement of battles won and peace restored. They settled in front of the fireplace, Emily wrapped in her favorite blanket, marshmallows melting in their cocoa. The flames danced, casting warm shadows across their faces. Rachel felt the tension she'd carried for months finally begin to release, like a long-held breath slowly exhaled. "Mommy?" Emily's voice was soft, thoughtful. "Are we safe now?" Rachel pulled her daughter closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Yes, baby, we're safe. And we're exactly where we belong." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their cocoa, watching the flames flicker and dance. Outside, crickets began their evening song, a gentle reminder that life goes on, that after every storm comes peace, after every struggle comes rest. Emily's head grew heavy against Rachel's shoulder, her breathing deep and steady. The empty cocoa mugs sat forgotten on the coffee table as mother and daughter found comfort in the quiet moment, in the knowledge that they had faced darkness together and emerged stronger. surrounded by a community that had finally found its voice and its heart. Rachel gazed into the fire, feeling the warmth of both the flames and her daughter against her side. The relief settled over them like a soft blanket, wrapping them in the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. Sunlight streamed through the community center windows as residents filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. The room hummed with anticipation, a stark contrast to the tension-filled gatherings of the past. Rachel sat with Emily in the third row, her daughter's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. "You okay, Mom?" Emily whispered, looking up with those observant eyes that seemed to see right through her. Rachel squeezed her hand. "More than okay, sweetie." The interim board chairman, Mr. Martinez, called the meeting to order. His voice carried across the packed room with gentle authority. First item on today's agenda is the vote to formally remove Karen Whitfield from her position as HOA president, following the evidence of misconduct presented at Wednesday's meeting. Rachel watched as hands rose decisively around the room. The vote was unanimous. A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the gathering, as if the whole community could finally breathe again. "Next," Mr. Martinez continued, "we need to elect new leadership. The floor is open for nominations. I nominate Rachel Green." The call came from several voices at once. Rachel's chest tightened as faces turned toward her. Mrs. Chen, who lived 3 doors down, stood up. "Rachel showed us what real leadership looks like. She fought for justice when it would have been easier to stay quiet. She protected my grandson," Jamal's grandmother added from her seat near the window. "And she did it without wanting anything in return." Emily beamed up at Rachel, pride shining in her eyes. But Rachel slowly rose, smoothing her sundress with suddenly nervous hands. "I'm deeply honored by your trust," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "But I believe I can serve our community better without an official title. What we need isn't just new leadership. We need to rebuild connections between neighbors. I'd like to help with that work, but as one of you, not above you." Murmurs of respect rippled through the room. Mr. Martinez smiled warmly. "Well said, Mrs. Green. Perhaps you'd consider serving on the Community Outreach Committee?" Rachel nodded. "I'd be happy to help in that way." The meeting proceeded with the election of new officers, a diverse group that better reflected their community. As people began to disperse, many stopped to shake Rachel's hand or offer quiet thanks. Later that morning, Rachel pulled into her driveway with her truck bed full of lumber and supplies. She'd noticed the sagging fence around Jamal's grandmother's house weeks ago, but Karen's violations notices had prevented anyone from helping. "Need a hand?" called Mr. Chen from next door, already walking over with his tool belt. "The more the better," Rachel replied with a smile. Soon a small crew had assembled. Jamal helped carry boards while Emily organized the tools with serious concentration. The morning air filled with the sounds of hammering and friendly chatter. "My Theodore would have loved this," Jamal's grandmother mused, bringing out a pitcher of lemonade. "He always said fences should bring people together, not keep them apart." Rachel paused her work, wiping sweat from her forehead. "He sounds like a wise man." "The wisest," the older woman agreed, watching Jamal show Emily how to hold a level. "And he'd be mighty proud of his grandson today." The children's laughter rang out as they chased each other through the yard, playing some game only they understood. The sound drew smiles from the adults working on the fence. "Mom, watch this," Emily called, turning a cartwheel in the grass. Jamal applauded, then tried to copy her, resulting in a tumbling roll that had them both giggling. Rachel's heart swelled at the sight. This was what community should be. Children playing without fear. Neighbors helping neighbors. Differences celebrated instead of feared. By late afternoon, the new fence stood straight and strong. Fresh white paint gleamed in the golden light as the sun began its descent. Neighbors gradually headed home, carrying leftover supplies and warm feelings of accomplishment. Rachel stayed behind, gathering the last of the tools. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, reminding her of the morning her world had changed, when she'd first stood up to Karen at that HOA meeting that felt so long ago now. Emily and Jamal sat on the porch steps, sharing the last cookies from Jamal's grandmother. Their easy friendship embodied everything Rachel had fought for. As she closed the truck's tailgate, Rachel paused, overwhelmed by gratitude, for second chances, for courage found in unlikely moments, for a daughter whose faith never wavered, for a community that chose love over fear. "Thank you," she whispered to the painted sky, her words carried away on the evening breeze. "Ready to head home, baby girl?" she called to Emily. "5 more minutes?" Emily pleaded, and Jamal joined with hopeful eyes. Rachel smiled. 5 more minutes. She leaned against the truck, watching the children chat and laugh in the fading light. The new fence stood as a testament to what they could build together, not just wood and nails, but trust, understanding, and hope for better days ahead. Golden morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Hope Community Church, casting warm patterns across the wooden pews. Rachel sat with Emily, nestled close to her side, while Jamal and his grandmother, Mrs. Williams, joined them in the same row. The familiar scent of old hymnals and polished wood brought comfort to Rachel's heart. As more congregation members arrived, genuine smiles and gentle touches replaced the usual hesitant glances. Mrs. Thompson, who lived 3 doors down, stopped to squeeze Rachel's shoulder. "So good to see you here," she whispered warmly. "Mr. Rodriguez," from across the street, nodded respectfully as he passed with his family. Emily beamed at Jamal, who sat more confidently now than he had in weeks. His grandmother patted his hand, pride shining in her eyes. The transformation in the young man touched Rachel deeply. Gone was the frightened teen who'd been harassed at that first HOA meeting. In his place sat someone who knew his worth. The soft prelude music faded as Pastor Michael stepped to the pulpit. His kind eyes swept across the congregation, settling briefly on their row with a gentle smile. "Today," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, "I want to talk about courage. Not the kind that comes from physical strength, but the kind that springs from love." Rachel felt Emily's small hand slip into hers. Her daughter's fingers were warm and sure, just like her faith had been throughout their ordeal. "1 John tells us that perfect love casts out fear," Pastor Michael continued. "We've seen that truth lived out in our own community these past weeks. When one person stands up for what's right, it gives others the courage to do the same. When we choose love over fear, light over darkness, remarkable things happen." Mrs. Williams dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Rachel knew she was thinking of Jamal's testimony, how her grandson had found his voice and helped expose years of discrimination. The morning sunlight strengthened, and for a moment, Rachel felt James's presence so strongly it took her breath away. Her late husband had always loved Sunday mornings, the peace of worship, the way it centered their family for the week ahead. She could almost hear his deep voice joining the hymns, feel his steady presence beside her. Pastor Michael's sermon wove through stories of biblical courage: David facing Goliath, Esther speaking up for her people, Daniel in the lion's den. But courage, he reminded them, lives in our everyday choices too. It's in standing up for others when it would be easier to look away. It's in choosing forgiveness over bitterness. It's in building bridges where others would build walls. The congregation nodded, many glancing toward Rachel's row. They'd all witnessed the changes in their neighborhood, how Karen's removal had sparked a renewal of community spirit. New friendships formed across old dividing lines. Gardens flourished where only restriction signs had stood before. During the final hymn, Rachel's voice joined with Emily's sweet soprano and Jamal's deepening tenor, Mrs. Williams' rich alto completed their impromptu quartet, the harmony a testament to how beauty could rise from ashes. After the benediction, they made their way through the crowd toward the doors. Fellow church members stopped to chat, no longer held back by fear of association. Rachel noticed how Jamal stood taller now, accepting their greetings with quiet confidence. Outside, the late morning sun warmed their faces. Children played on the church lawn, while adults gathered in small groups, reluctant to end their time together. The scene before her made Rachel's heart full. This was what community should look like. Emily tugged at her hand, blue eyes serious in her young face. Rachel knelt down to her daughter's level, brushing back a stray curl from her cheek. "Mommy," Emily said softly, her voice carrying all the wisdom children sometimes possess. "Daddy would be so proud of you." Rachel's vision blurred with tears as she pulled Emily close. In that moment, she felt James's approval like a warm embrace around them both. They had done more than stand up to a bully. They'd helped build something lasting and true. Love had indeed cast out fear, replacing it with hope that would echo far beyond their little neighborhood. Through her tears, Rachel smiled, holding her daughter close as the church bells chimed their joyful song into the Sunday morning air. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Rachel Green, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.